I mean, as you say, Tucker, we live in a very politicized time. But, when people are fighting for their lives, when their whole livelihood is at stake, when they've lost everything, if you can't put politics aside for that, then you're just not going to be able to. So I'll work with anybody who wants to help the people of Southwest Florida and throughout our state.
That's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis this week on the topic of putting politics aside during a crisis. Lives matter. For people in the Northeast, though, it's hard to forget something the New York Times reports today. Quote, as a freshman congressman in 2013, Ron DeSantis was unambiguous. A federal bailout for the New York region after Hurricane Sandy was an irresponsible boondoggle, a symbol of the put it on the credit card mentality he had come to Washington to oppose. Quote, I sympathize with the victims, but his answer was no. So here we are in 2022. As you heard, Ron DeSantis has changed his tune. Let's bring in the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. I'm glad he changed his tune, but the hypocrisy shouldn't go unnoted. Rev, where do you come down?
Definitely the hypocrisy should not go unnoticed. And clearly, you have to suspect, did he change his mind? Or did he change his circumstance? Because when he was talking about New York, he had no real stake in that. Now we're talking about Florida, where he's the governor, where he has to be held responsible for how the people are saved or not saved, how they deal with it or not. So there is a lot of self-interest in his mind change. So it's one thing to have a conversion. It's another thing to have self-interest.
Michael Steele.
Oh, I think the Rev, he's got me smiling here because he's so spot on. That self-interest thing is a you-know-what, right? It's amazing. It's amazing how the worm just turns all up in it. And that's where DeSantis finds himself. It's a far cry from 9 years ago as a congressman talking about the good people in the Northeast, particularly in the New York region, who were devastated by Hurricane Sandy. Yeah, they don't have a lot of hurricanes like Florida does. But when they do, that stuff matters. It's impactful in ways that it may not necessarily be in Florida, particularly even with a small hurricane. And the fact that you'd have that attitude then, and now as governor, sitting there, well, this is clearly important and we want to work with anyone and we appreciate all the help. And what would he be saying if members of the New York delegation were like, no, I'm not supporting any money going to Florida? If the members of the Maryland delegation or the Delaware delegation, those of us on the Chesapeake Bay who suffered through what happens when torrential rains and hurricanes come through, took that attitude. So I appreciate the sort of kumbaya, let's all work together, but we cannot forget what probably the real attitude is, because I would suspect should, God forbid, some natural disaster befall us here in the North and Northeast region, what would the governor of Florida say about a federal support or FEMA support for our recovery? And that, I think, is something, again, that the New York Times points out is what's relevant here. These things do matter. And your words, whether in 2013 or today, they still matter.
Rev, I just can't stop thinking about the story we covered a week ago. And obviously, the aid is important because people in Florida are hurting and lives are on the line. But the lives of the migrants that he put on airplanes and flew to Martha's Vineyard were human lives as well. I mean, the picking and choosing is part of the fabric of who this GOP is right now, too.
Which is why you have to question whether this is really self-interest or whether this is a real conversion. And clearly, you can't, on one hand, send people with no basis of knowing what's going to happen to them and clearly not caring away from your state to make a political on 1 week and then act like you're this great unifier around saving people the next week and not expect people like me to say, let's wait and see, but I have serious doubts. You can't have a movable moral central.